Welcome, everyone. This is a webinar from the ASQ Statistics Division. The title of the webinar is SIPOC, the Unsung Hero of Lean Six Sigma. We are recording this webinar, and we will post the recording to our YouTube channel for the Statistics Division, so you can look at that later if you want to. After the webinar is over, we'll send out an email with the credits you'll be earning for this. And then if you have questions at any time during the webinar, you can ask those in the chat or the Q&A section there. Or if you have technical difficulties, I'll be monitoring the chat and you can ask me in there. And then on ASQ's homepage in the Statistics Division area, we always post the links to the YouTube channel and have some other information on upcoming webinars and things like that. So lots of information in there. Our speaker today is Eric Hayler. He's the principal of the Hayler Group and a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. He's led continuous improvement efforts at BMW Manufacturing and Amazon. In the past, he was head of BMW's Central Laboratory and the Analytical Laboratory Manager in the Research and Development Department of the Engineered Minerals Division of the J.M. Huber Corporation. He's a graduate of Rutgers University and holds a PhD in solid-state inorganic chemistry. He's held a lot of positions within the ASQ community as chair of the board of directors. He's been a lot of different titles in the Global Advisory Committee and on the board of directors. And he's also been a member of the Board of Examiners for the South Carolina Governor's Quality Award. He's an adjunct professor of business analytics at the University of South Carolina, upstate in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and he's been adjunct professor of chemistry at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And he has served on the executive committee of the Board of Trustees of the Southern Association of Colleges and School Commissions on Colleges, and that's the regional body for the accreditation of degree-granting higher education institutions in the southern states. So well qualified to give us a webinar on the topic today. If you have any questions, just send me a little chat. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Eric. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Are you hearing and seeing me okay?
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Well, happy Friday, everybody. And Jennifer, thank you for that very nice introduction. I've had a couple of bullet points of my bio on the screen while she was going over those. The ones at the top are some of the things that I'm currently doing, and the ones at the bottom are a few notable points from my past. One of the things that I really like about what I'm doing these days is that I do have some manufacturing clients that I work with, but I'm also in the education sector, and I'm also working with folks from the nonprofit sector in my role as continuous improvement trainer and coach with the Spartanburg academic movement. So I really enjoy getting a chance to teach and apply these tools across different sectors. I'm one of those people that didn't go out looking for quality. Quality found me. I was working at BMW, and I had the opportunity to jump on their very first wave of black belt training. It was over 20 years ago, and I enjoyed it and never looked back. My topic for today, as Jennifer had mentioned, is SIPOC. And I was thinking about the audience I was going to be talking to today, and I see in perusing the list of names, there's some I recognize and many that I don't. And I was imagining that any one of you fall into one of two camps. One camp, maybe you're not so familiar with SIPOC, you want to see how best to use it, or you're in the camp that may be thinking, how is he going to talk about SIPOC for an hour? Because SIPOC is a little bit of a basic tool, and it's not particularly complicated, but it's deceptively simple. Actually, SIPOC has can be used for several different purposes, and it's a very versatile tool. And that's how I can talk about this topic for an hour or nearly an hour. And no matter which camp you're in, I hope that you can find something interesting as we go through this. I'll start off with a few of the basics about SIPOC, and then as I was putting this presentation together, I realized that over the years I have had the opportunity to teach and to actually coach on two different major types of SIPOCs, but I've never had to distinguish between them before, and so I found that I had to give them names. I've decided to call them Freeform SIPOC and line-by-line SIPOC. But as we go through this, if you already know these by another name, I'd love to hear about it, and I'd be happy to adopt a lecture about it. By the way, I do see some things coming in through the chat. It is a little difficult for me to monitor things as I'm speaking, so I'm hoping that Jennifer, you'll just jump in there with anything that I should be aware of or any particular questions. And if possible, I do like to have questions during my presentation. I will save some time at the end, but it's more fun for me to answer questions during the presentation. On my overview here, you see that there's actually a third type of SIPOC that's there. It's called the detailed SIPOC. One of the clients that I'm working with right now, there's the executive deployment champion is retired from the military, and he likes to bring a lot of rigor to SIPOCs. And what we're doing there is so interesting and kind of in some ways a natural extension of what many of us have been using SIPOCs for a long time. I thought I'd share that work with you as well. So here are a few opening thoughts about SIPOC. First of all, SIPOC is one example of a Lean Six Sigma tool. I want to focus on that word tool for a minute. When you say tool, you may think of a kind of a tool from a toolbox, a literal toolbox. Maybe you would think of a hammer, a screwdriver, a wrench, anything like that. And Lean Six Sigma tools are much the same way. They are designed for a particular application, but normally they can be used for many different applications. And I've got an example of a tool with me right here. And I don't know. One of the things I've always enjoyed about Six Sigma was the analogies that we always make to martial arts, black belts, green belts, yellow belts. Maybe this looks like a stick on camera. It is a stick, but it's also called a bow, and it's a martial arts tool. In a previous life, I used to teach martial arts, although I never was formally trained on using this thing. But this, if I remember my martial arts history correctly, what this was originally used for was to go across somebody's back, and a bucket of water would be placed on each side, and they would use this as a tool to help carry water from the source into the village. So in feudal Japan, the ruling class prohibited the villagers from having any kind of weapons. They took them all away. So what the villagers did was they eventually took the tools that they had and learned to adapt them to new things. So things like a bow, or maybe you've heard of nunchucks or nunchakas, they were originally designed to help plant rice. They were adopted to new uses. Now, if you think about using a stick like this for defense or for attacking, you can imagine that you're striking somebody with it like this. You can imagine striking somebody with it like this. Different ways of using this particular tool, even if we're just thinking about using it as a weapon. So which one is right? Is striking this way correct? Is striking this way more correct? Well, the answer, of course, depends on what it is you're trying to use it for. What situation are you in? And, it also depends heavily on how much you practice. So if I practice a lot using it this way, this is going to be the most effective way for me to use it. If I practice using it this way, this will be the most effective way for me to use it. And that's what happens within Six Sigma tools. Which tools are the best ones to use? Well, they're the one that the situation calls for and the ones that the practitioner has practiced over and over again. So my point is, there's no wrong way to use that stick, and there's no wrong way to use a SIPOC. The way that I show you, and I'm going to show you several different ways, may be a little bit different than the way that you use it. And that doesn't mean that either one of us is incorrect. Now, what's the best way to use it? Well, in order to learn that, practice it, and a good coach can help you learn how to apply any of these tools, especially the SIPOC, in an effective way. At the beginning of the black belt and green belt classes that I teach, I've got this one slide that shows the Lean Six Sigma roadmap, and I've got it divided up into the 5 columns: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And up underneath each one, I've got a list of the tools that the students will be exposed to during the course. Some of those tools, we're wanting to just understand, remember, but many of them we want to be able to have them apply after the training. And SIPOC certainly falls into that category of a tool that we want folks to be able to apply. I do not, and I know different organizations have different views on this. Some organizations require the utilization of specific tools for a Lean Six Sigma project. I like to be as least prescriptive as possible, and so the only tool that I require for my practitioners in a Lean Six Sigma project would be a project charter or a similar chartering document. Now, that being said, the 2 most common tools that I would see in not every project, but almost every project, would be a SIPOC diagram and a process flow map, flow chart. One of the things that makes SIPOC so valuable is that it helps you to ask the questions, helps you to understand how to ask the right questions. I have a short video clip on that I'd like to share with you. My favorite genre of books and movies is science fiction, and my all-time favorite science fiction author is Isaac Asimov. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the relatively new series on Apple Plus called Foundation. If you're a science fiction geek like me, you'll probably enjoy it. This one, though, this is from the movie I, Robot. I think it was 2004, starring Will Smith. And in this particular scene, or actually 2 short scenes I'm going to show you, he stars opposite James Cromwell. Mr. Cromwell, who you see in the picture here, plays a scientist who recently killed himself, and he's leaving clues to Will Smith's character, the detective, on why. So I'd like to go ahead and share this video. And if for any, we tested this at the beginning of the session, so you should be able to hear this. But if for any reason it's not, Jennifer, please let me know.
Good to see you again, son. Hello, Doctor. Everything that follows is a result of what you see here. Is there something you want to tell me? I'm sorry. My responses are limited. Just ask the right questions. Why did you call me? Trust your judgment. Normally, these circumstances wouldn't require a homicide detective. But then our interactions have never been entirely normal. Would you agree? Is there something you want to say to me? I'm sorry. My responses are limited. You must ask the right questions. Why would you kill yourself? That detective is the right question. Program terminated. All right, old man, breadcrumbs follow. Show me the way home. Run program. It's good to see you again, son. Hello, Doctor. Everything that follows is a result of what you see here. What do I see here? I'm sorry. My responses are limited. Just ask the right questions. Is there a problem with the 3 laws? The 3 laws are perfect. Why would you build a robot that can function without? The 3 laws will lead to only one logical outcome. What outcome? Solution. Whose revolution? That detective is the right question. I'm terminated.
Asking the right questions. sec. And so SIPOC is a tool that helps you to ask the right questions. So if you're just learning SIPOC for the first time, that's the sort of thing that the SIPOC will help you to do. And if you're well acquainted with the SIPOC and you're also a teacher and a coach, I think using the SIPOC and getting the practitioner to be able to ask the right questions is among the most valuable things a coach can provide. So, starting off at the very beginning, here is our SIPOC template. SIPOC stands for Supplier, Input, Process, Output, and Customers. I put this template together, and when I originally did this a couple of years ago, I thought, well, I feel kind of silly creating an Excel template that has 5 columns to it. I mean, anybody can do it. But I've been surprised that, over the years, how many times I have seen people just adopt the template. And, I was thinking about it this morning. I believe I've seen this particular template used over 100 times. So don't underestimate the power of putting together a template for somebody. And of course, you're welcome to use mine. What do you use a SIPOC for? Well, traditionally, I would say at least 3 different important things. One is to help scope the project. So, you've got the process in the center, you've got your inputs and your outputs. Once you clarify what your inputs and your outputs are, that helps you understand where the beginnings and the end of your process are. Now, there's a big difference about whether we're talking about a manufacturing process or a transactional process. A manufacturing process is when you're making something. A transactional process is when you have an exchange of goods or services or information. And usually with a manufacturing process, because you can walk the process usually and you can see it, there's an end, there's a beginning, and so those are the boundaries of the process. So it's somewhat less important to find the scope for a manufacturing process. If you think about a process like a purchasing process, accounting process, recruiting process, what are the inputs and outputs of those? Where does it start? Where does it stop? That's a little bit more nebulous, and so that's a special application, a special emphasis for application for transactional processes. Also, a good reason to put together a SIPOC is to have a comprehensive list of stakeholders, key stakeholders, and those would be the people who receive the outputs or provide the inputs. Those are your customers and suppliers. At Amazon, we were required to, for every kaizen event, for every project, for every A3 that we opened up, it was required that we put together a SIPOC diagram. The biggest reason for that was to understand who the key stakeholders are and to be able to have the discussion about who needs to be in the room, whether it's a physical room or whether it's a virtual room. And I would say that those 2 applications for SIPOC are well suited to the design phase of the DMA process. And we can also, and you see where I've labeled this SIPOC template top, there's also a bottom, and up underneath there are columns for listing the metrics. How do you measure the outputs? How do you measure the inputs? What are some of the process metrics? Fleshing out metrics are typically part of the measure phase of the project. And as I said before, I usually try not to be too terribly prescriptive. I'm not particular if a black belt or green belt candidate is filling out bottom portion of the SIPOC in the define phase or you wait to get to the measure phase. But having that comprehensive list of metrics is very important. So here's a first example of what I'll call a freeform SIPOC, and this is for a car purchasing process. A shout out to Mr. Hassan. I borrowed this from his example out on the internet. The link is down there below. I've seen this example used quite a few times. Now, the process, you start off by describing at a very high level. Only, in this case, well, up top, it's broken down into 5 steps. Usually 3 to 5 steps is what I prefer to see. I have colleagues who like to list a little bit more detailed process, and that works well for them. And So for this particular process here, purchasing a new car, client comes in, we meet with the new client, we understand what it is that they need, we give them the options and what it is that we have to offer. Hopefully we can come to an agreement and make arrangements to sell the car, fix the price, we sign the paperwork, and then we give them the keys and the title to the car. Now, of course, there's many more detailed steps that go along with this, but at a high level, that's enough to describe the process. One of the natural flows coming from a SIPOC would be to establish that process flow map or flow chart. I mentioned that I like the analogy between Six Sigma and martial arts. Another analogy is the use of combinations. In teaching new martial arts students, we teach them basic blocks, punches, basic kicks, and then at first we march up and down the floor, block, 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 punch, punch, punch. But then we teach them to put combinations together: block, punch, block, punch, kick. And it's the same with Six Sigma tools as well. SIPOC leads you naturally into process flow map, and if efficiency is the focus of the project, that leads naturally into a value stream map. So, very high level process for the SIPOC. We've got the outputs for this particular process, so it's the new client account, it's paperwork that goes to DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. We've got dealer paperwork, we got service contract, we've got the payment. Who receives these things? Well, the car buyer gets the car, the dealership owners get the payment, the DMV gets the paperwork, the service department gets the contract. What are some of the inputs to the process? Well, it's the cars, it's the option packages. We need to get the car ready, so car washes and fuel. Who supplies those things? The OEM, the manufacturer, suppliers, the gas station, and the printer. So some tips in completing a SIPOC. Start off with naming the process, and that's not as easy as it sounds. You'd be surprised at how many times that I've seen groups, teams coming together, and they put together a SIPOC diagram, and at the end, it doesn't reflect what it is that they're trying to accomplish. It doesn't match up very well with the problem statement and goal statement for their project or for their activity. And then I asked them, what's the name of this process? And, when they finally come up with the name, it doesn't link up with what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So start off by naming the process. Begin with the customer and work backwards. This is such a common approach. I understand that some companies, instead of calling it a SIPOC diagram, they call it a COPIS diagram, COPIS instead of SIPOC. And that goes along well with best practices for doing value stream mapping. If you're value stream mapping a process, one of the best practices is to walk out to the end of the process and then document it going backwards. That was a special focus at Amazon for Jeff Bezos. He was famous for saying, start with the customer and work backwards. Now, this being said, this is not my preferred way of diving into a SIPOC. For me and most of the teams that I've coached, it works better to start in the middle of the process and work outwards. So list those high-level steps to the process, talk about what the outputs are, talk about what the inputs are, talk about who gets the outputs, talk about who provides the inputs. Definition that we can use for customer is anybody who receives an output. And that ends up being an interesting conversation. An example of putting together a SIPOC while I was working for BMW, I would ask classes, so what is the output from our process? What's the output from our plan? And of course they would say, oh, cars is the output. Okay, well, does anything else come out of our process besides cars? And they'd have to think about it a little bit, and eventually somebody would say, scrap. Ah, yes, scrap, okay. So we have to process the scrap, and some of it goes to landfill, some of it gets recycled, some of it gets processed as hazardous waste. And then I'd ask, well, does anything else come out of our process? And eventually we get to, well, there's air emissions. Ah, yes, who receives that? Community does. There's wastewater that comes out. We have treated wastewater. Who receives that? The city receives that. We have trash coming from the cafeteria, and with more than a few associates, it's not a small amount of trash. Who gets that? That's the landfill. And it's odd to think about the customers of a manufacturing process as being like the community or being the landfill or something like that. But they, with this definition, customer, anybody that receives an output, those are also customers of the process. By the same token, anybody who provides an input we can consider to be a supplier. Once you have your list of customers and suppliers, then you have hopefully your comprehensive list of key stakeholders, and you can decide, do these people or do these entities need to be part of my project or my workshop or my problem-solving activity, my A3 or my PDCA work? Or do I just need to have them documented as part of my RACI chart? Do I need to consult with them? Do I need to keep them informed? And then that last point there, list only the high-level process steps. 1 to 5 is a good number, but of course I did tell you I was going to share with you a more detailed example afterwards. Here's an example of a Freeform SIPOC. This was one of the very first SIPOCs that I created. I did this together with my team that was focused on reducing the number of broken tools in our plant. And I fell back and I looked at this SIPOC that we created more than 20 years ago, and I think, well, I could see some things that we should have done differently, but I decided I wouldn't try to make adjustments to it. This is the top portion of the SIPOC, and I'll show you the bottom portion later on. So the process is preparing tools, replacing tools, validating that they're going to work like they're supposed to, and then documenting the work performed. What are the outputs? Well, we've got repaired tools, sometimes replaced tools, the capability and durability data that goes along with that. Who receives these things? Production associates, supervisors, repair associates. What are some of the inputs to this process? Well, they're the broken tools that are coming in off the line, the replacement tools that we need to purchase, or the parts that we need to repair them. Documentation, the testing equipment, the software. Who supplies these things? Well, the tool reps, the tool repair folks, the storeroom, and as well as planning. All right, well, let's give this a try. So again, I'm under the impression that some of you are very familiar with SIPOC and others of you maybe not at all. So let's take a minute and think about how it is that we would create a SIPOC. I'm going to call up a blank template here. It's completely blank, supplier, input, process, output, and control. And I'd like for us to create a SIPOC for making a cup of coffee. And Jennifer, we'll see how well this is going to work. Jennifer, you said that you would try to give everybody the chance to unmute. And so I'd like to, and I know we have a lot of people on the call, so I don't know if this will work. We may have to do this with chat. But can somebody tell me a few of the high-level steps that are needed to make a cup of coffee?
Okay, give me a second here, Eric. Everyone, I'm going to unmute you. So feel free to mute yourself back up if you want to, if you don't want to be unmuted. I think the only way to allow you to be unmuted is for me to do it. So
you were part of my yourself or somebody else.
Want to be walking into like a horse
Right.
with this whole
It's a lot easier to go to Al-Anon meeting and get a good message sometimes than it is to try to find something Avenue.
maybe that's not going to work very well. So we are getting some things in the chat. So why don't I read those off to you?
Okay, and I can see some of them too because I'm keeping an eye on it as we go. And so the first ones that I see, and please go ahead and add to that if you would. For those of you who were kind enough to speak up, there's just too many people on the call to be able to do it that way today. So if you put a few things in the chat, that would be great. So I see grind the coffee beans, but you know what? I don't grind the coffee beans. I use a K-cup. Put the kettle on the boil. Oh, well, you know, if I had a different process. So maybe it would be a good idea for me to share with you how it is that I was planning to make the coffee. So here's a picture of my setup. This is a picture from my kitchen here. I've got a Keurig. I've got little K-cups that I use. You see my Yoda cup over here. I've got sweetener that I use, and then I've got some cream, as well as a spoon to stir it with. And so, you know, the points that I see there in the chat, heating the water, kettle on the boil, grind the beans, those are all great process steps, but they're for a different process. And so that's one of the important uses of the SIPOC, to become clear about what kind of a process it is that we're working with here. So some of the ones that I see there, turn on the machine. Start with that one.
We did get a fill coffee pot with water.
Oh, okay. Fill with water.
We did get a buy coffee.
Ah, okay. I'm not gonna. Let's see. We're gonna assume that I'm going downstairs in the morning and all of my materials are already there. That's a good thought, and that helps us to determine what the scope of this discussion helps us to determine the scope of what our process that we're going to be addressing is going to be. We have, press start. Actually, before we press, I'll document that, press start. So before we can press start, we're going to need to put the K-cup in. Press start. I saw somewhere in there, I saw add cream. And I'll also add the sugar to that in the same step. And we already have probably more steps than I would want to have in a high-level math here. I would try to keep it to 3 to 5. And so I think just to finish out this part here, I'll go ahead and I'll say enjoy coffee. Now, how about the outputs? What are some of the outputs from this process? Can we have a cup of coffee? What else? Dirty mug. Dirty.
Empty K-cup.
Say that again?
Empty K-cup.
Use K-cup. Anything else? Broken cup? Hopefully not broken.
I think there was dirty spoon.
Aroma. I never thought of that. I'll put that down. That's interesting. Water level change. Interesting. What else? Empty packets. Anything else? The only one I didn't see it, happiness. I like that. The only one I didn't see up there that I was thinking of was dirty spoon. Okay, good. And who receives these outputs? Who are our customers? And our definition of customer is anybody who receives an output. Caffeinated person. Sorry for my spelling. For yourself and your guests, dishwasher. Yes, I like the guest one, but for the process that I'm defining, I'm only talking about coffee for myself. I'm not talking about making coffee for other people. How would you have known that? You wouldn't have known that. That's what we get to talk this out in completing the SIPOC. One of the recipients, one of the customers is the trash. Good. Sink. Okay. Dishwasher. I'll put dishwasher / sink. Anything? Do you see anything distinctly different, Jennifer? Did we capture that? I think we got that from this one. Recycle if applicable.
Someone mentioned that we didn't have a cup in the process.
We didn't have a cup in the process? Oh, yes. In the high-level process, we were not able to list everything just yet, but we will take that into account. Okay, let's talk about inputs for a minute. What are the inputs for making a cup of coffee? Sugar or sweetener? A cup? Water? Spoon? Cup? Mug? Hour. That's interesting. Okay. Electricity, yeah. Machine. Machine is a good thought. So, I would say that that's a valid thing to put under inputs. I typically do not put machines and fixtures into the list of inputs, but that's certainly a valid point. Money, that's interesting. Well, actually, I'm not going to put money down there because the purchasing process is going to be outside the scope of what we're doing with making a cup of coffee just for me in the morning. All right, I think we got most of them. Oh, time, that's interesting. Now, what about suppliers? Who provides these things? Supermarket, and I get mine from Walmart. Kitchen. Okay, the kitchen, and specifically I'm going to go with dishwasher because that's where the clean dishes are going to come from. Well, the dishwasher, the person who does the dishwashing. Worker, okay, so that would be the, maybe that would be the consumer. Supplier, utility company. Good. Water, city water. Why do you exclude the machine under inputs? I'm happy to put that down there. But as I mentioned, machines and fixtures are typically parts of the process. I'm usually only listing consumables in the inputs. The machine is not something that needs to be supplied every time we run the process. Would power also be a supplier? Yes, got that the utility company there. All right, I think we've got a good list here, and I know that if we had more time, we could do a more comprehensive job of this here. So thank you for that. And hopefully you saw that this was less about actually putting together a SIPOC for a cup of coffee, and it was more about talking about what is, and you know what? I failed to put the name of the process here, so that would be Eric making a cup of coffee in the morning. Let me go back to my presentation here, and I'll show you what I had come up with here. So this is what I came up with. And if I look at what I came up with ahead of time and what we just came up with, I think that what we just came up with was better. A team is much better to go through a problem-solving process. SIPOC is a team sport. You really should not. No, I need to say this. Careful how I say this. So normally you would not want to put together a finalized SIPOC by yourself. Now that being said, before I put together a workshop, I usually sit together with the workshop sponsor, and I will create a SIPOC together, similar to the one that I'm showing here. And it's the kind of thing that I would just kind of keep in my back pocket. I wouldn't show it to my team. And then when I create something like this, then I can see, okay, here are my customers, here are my suppliers. This is who I need to invite to my workshop or to my project team. And then once I have those folks at the table, just like we just did, we would create the SIPOC for ourselves. And normally it comes out much better than me trying to do it by myself or with the key stakeholders. I'm going to flip back one here. So some of the things to think about, like in that example that we just did. So first one was, what is my process? Were we talking about a drip coffee maker, a process where we grind our own beans? You know, what kind of French press? What are we talking about? And then a lot of times I have folks who will assume, oh, well, we're talking about a process like Starbucks, right? Are we talking about selling coffee, or are we talking about making coffee myself for me? Or am I making it for others? Is this coffee for the break room? And that changes the perspective on the different types of materials that need to be available and what is in and outside of scope. A couple of things that we didn't talk too much about. Does the process include setup and cleanup? We really didn't address that too much in the SIPOC that we took. Does it include the consumption of the coffee? And then when we talked about where does the coffee come from, we said supermarket, we said Walmart. Should we talk about from coffee coming from the farmer, or is it, does it come from the person who goes to the grocery store and get it? So these are different things to consider. So that's the top of the SIPOC. But on the bottom of the SIPOC, there's an opportunity in the template to list the measures. So directly up underneath the inputs, there are X's. You know, what are the measures of the inputs? Up underneath the outputs, there are the column for Y. What are the measures of the outputs? And then under the process, there are the little X's. What are the measures of the process? Efficiency measures and things like that. It's not critically important to distinguish between big X's and little X's, but it is an opportunity and kind of a prompt to get you to think in that direction. Here's the extension of my tool repair example with some metrics listed at the bottom there. So what are some of the output metrics? Tool expenses, number of broken tools, number of damaged tools, head count, tool replacement time. Some of the input metrics, a number of wrong tools, number of tools stored incorrectly, number of tools misused, tools with witness marks on them that show that they were used in a way that they weren't designed for, in a bad way. And as I said, looking back on this SIPOC 20 years later, I think I may have shuffled. I think if I were to do it today, I would probably shuffle around which category I put some of those input and output metrics in. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm more concerned, and this is how I coach people, I'm more concerned with getting the information on the board. As long as we've gotten the information and we put it up on the board somehow, which section you put it in is less important as long as you've got it identified. So if we were going back to our coffee example and taking a look at the time, I was originally thinking that maybe we would take the time to list some of the metrics, but I'm just going to give you the example that I came up with here. So some of the output metrics may be temperature of the coffee, quality of the coffee. What is the measure of quality? It could be customer satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or something like that. The amount of trash, the volume of the coffee. Some of the input measures, the type of sweetener and the amount of sweetener, the type of cream and the volume of the cream, and the type of K-cup and the water type. Is it tap water, which it is in this example here? Is it filtered water? Is it bottled water? What is it? What are some of the metrics of the process? Well, the water temperature and the flow rate, the warm-up time of the machine, the volume of the water that gets consumed. Now, in looking at these things here, some of these things are controllable, and some of them may not be controllable, and that's a distinction to make. But just because a parameter isn't currently measured doesn't mean you shouldn't list it in your SIPOC. In fact, I would say identifying things that are measurables that are not currently measured represents an important opportunity. So far we've been talking about the first type of SIPOC. I called it a freeform SIPOC. A variation on that is a line-by-line SIPOC. So where you, for every process step, you list an output or outputs, and you list input or inputs. And you do the same for who receives those outputs and who provides those inputs. Here's an example of a wire extrusion process here. What are some of the high-level steps? Well, there are many steps in the wire extrusion process, but I've only listed them here, listed 4 of them here: cutting, flux preparation, extruding, and packaging. Now, for the cutting process, what are the inputs? Steel sheets. Who provides those? The steel supplier. What comes out of the cutting process? It's the cut wire. And who receives those? It's the warehouse. And I won't read all of these here, but you see there's a one-to-one correspondence for every line here. This is very similar to an approach that we took at BMW, although it wasn't for SIPOCs. There was a mechanism called the MPM, the Management Process Model. And in the Management Process Model, all major areas of the organization were required to identify core processes. And those core processes were broken down into their high-level steps like this. And there was a listing of the one-to-one correspondence of inputs, outputs, customers, and suppliers for each one of those high-level steps. So this is another common approach for using a SIPOC. And then, here would be the coffee example here. I've got the same 5 high-level steps: turn the machine on, put the K-cup in, put the cup under the drip, press through, add cream and sweetener. So what are the outputs of the process? Who receives those? What are the inputs? And who supplies those things? Coming to our last type of SIPOC, and this one is maybe new for most folks. If you do have experience in using these more detailed SIPOCs, I'd be interested to hear about that. I think most folks are, whether or not you call them freeform SIPOCs or line-by-line SIPOCs, you may not have used those terms before, but I think that most folks who use SIPOCs are familiar with them. The detailed SIPOC is a variation of the line-by-line SIPOC. In this case, we're not listing just the high-level process steps, we're listing all of the detailed process steps. And so here's our coffee example again, whereas before we had 5 steps, now I think we've got 12 steps. Well, let's just take a look here. So turning the machine on, checking to see if water is needed and fill it if necessary, load the K-cup, put the cup under the drip, press through, add cream, add sweetener, stir it, put the lid on the cup, put the spoon in the dishwasher, drink the coffee. So now it's clear that the consumption process is part of the process. And so then the last step would be to put the cup in the dishwasher. And then just like we did with the line-by-line SIPOC in the previous example, we've got outputs listed for every one of the detailed process steps, as well as inputs, customers, and suppliers. I mentioned that one of the clients that I'm working with right now likes to be very vigorous about their SIPOCs. And so we have now taken that line-by-line SIPOC, added the detailed process steps, and rather than just listing up underneath the metrics for that, the X's and the Y's, we now list them on a line-by-line basis. So for the process step, fill it with water if necessary. The input measures are volume of water and type of water. And then the output measure would be about for press the brew button. Input measures would be for actually brewing the coffee, the temperature of the water, the volume of the water flow rate. And then the output measures would be the volume of the coffee and the amount of the trash that gets generated. We've also found it useful to look at the inputs and outputs in process flow format. So very similar to a conventional flow chart. We've got here along these two lines here, the 12 steps, detailed steps of the process, and then the inputs are listed above, and any input metrics, excuse me, not the inputs, the input metrics are listed above, and the output metrics are listed below. So, detailed SIPOC, just a little bit of additional detail to a traditional SIPOC. Me personally, I like the very first version I showed you. I like the Freeform SIPOC. I like the brainstorming aspect of it, and you know, unless you really need to get into the weeds, then my recommendation is to practice and get good at performing and creating Freeform SIPOCs. So to summarize, the SIPOC is a tool that helps us to scope the process. What are the boundaries of our process that we're going to be addressing for our continuous improvement project or workshop? It helps us to identify key stakeholders, and it helps us to identify the input and output metrics for our process. And we talked about 3 different types of SIPOCs: Freeform SIPOC, line by line, and the detailed SIPOC. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions. Jennifer, have you made note of any specific questions in the chat?
Yes, there is a question. Would you perform a SIPOC prior to getting voice of the customer, or would you work your SIPOC based upon information provided from voice of the customer?
Well, as I said before, there's no wrong way to use a tool. My preference is to create your SIPOC first, because then you understand who your customers are, and then you can gather the voice of the customer from there.
There was a comment that the detailed SIPOC is hard and takes a lot of time.
It does, and I'm not a huge fan. But there are people who are fans, and I also mentioned that the different types of SIPOC can be applied to different phases of the DMAIC project. And so for the design phase, I think doing the Freeform SIPOC is great. The metrics you don't usually flesh out into the measure phase of a project, and so that detailed SIPOC I wouldn't even attempt until I was into the measure phase. Any other questions that are out there in the chat? I'll cruise a little bit too here.
I don't think there were any other big questions.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, that was a really good presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
So just again, we'll send out an email with the RUs that you earned for watching the webinar. The slides are usually posted on the ASQ Statistics Division website. The reporting is usually posted on the YouTube channel, and just thank everyone for attending this webinar. That's a joint production from the ASQ Statistics Division and the Six Sigma Forum. And really want to thank Eric Hayler for giving us this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer.